The rhetoric and fear surrounding terrorism has reared its ugly head. Elected leaders and presidential hopefuls have criticized Islam and made statements that have disenfranchised our Muslim community. Last Sunday, Chuck Todd on Meet the Press highlighted the differences in current language and how George W. Bush spoke of our Muslim brothers and sisters.
I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down. And I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering.
The face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. That's not what Islam is all about. Islam is peace.
That would be like saying we weren't at war with Nazis because we were afraid to offend some Germans who may have been members of the Nazi party but weren't violent themselves. This is a clash of civilizations.
When it comes to the common rights and needs of men and women, there is no clash of civilizations.
If there's a rabid dog running around in your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog.
And we respect the faith, and we welcome people of all faiths in America. And we're not going to let the war on terror or terrorists cause us to change our values.
Joining me now is Corey Saylor, National Legislative Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations. Corey, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
So, talk to me a little bit about the work that you do. It has a lot to do with monitoring the tone of what's happening when it comes to Islam and the rhetoric behind it here in the United States, correct?
So first and foremost, the organization I work for is a civil liberties organization. And the work that I specifically do is to examine anti-Muslim sentiment in the United States and try to find ways to push back against it, to help America remember that other religious minorities have been subject to these same kind of fears. Catholics were subject to these kind of fears in the past. When Mitt Romney was running for president, he was attacked for being Mormon. I had to go on TV and defend him for his faith. So it's history that we're familiar with. This is just a new cycle.
So what are we seeing? The fact that we have George W. Bush basically trying to recognize, to tell the American people that not all Islam is basically fanatical. Like he went out of his way. He made sure that he had that conversation that we saw in the backdrop was here at the National Mosque. Sure. He wanted to make sure that Americans felt safe with their communities and for the folks that actually live within their communities as well. What has changed between then and now?
I think, unfortunately, that politicians today have decided to play into ISIS's hands. ISIS wants Americans turning on each other. And right now we have President Obama will not go into a mosque and say the same kind of things that President Bush said. We have Republican governors and Democratic governors around the country saying they won't take Syrian refugees, even though it's well known that among the attackers in Paris, the mastermind is a Belgian national. The man they're still searching for right now is born Belgian. So why are we saying we're not going to have Syrian or Iraqi refugees, but we are, we're not going to worry about Belgians? This is the same mistake we made in World War II. In World War II, we put Japanese Americans in internment camps. German Americans, we didn't do the same thing to them.
Well, so when we start looking at the presidential hopefuls, the individuals that are going to make the decisions on our foreign policy agenda, having such tough rhetoric against Muslim Americans in many cases, but also just Muslims in general, what tone does that create? Are you seeing a difference within your watch group of how chat rooms and so on and so forth are talking about Muslims and Muslim Americans?
So first of all, it's a failure of political leadership because this is the time to bring Americans together, not finger point and turn them against each other. The effect that it has when George Bush went to a mosque in Washington, D.C., we saw the backlash that was happening against American Muslims back off a little bit. This time around, many of us are saying this is some of the worst backlash we have seen since the 9/11 attacks. And in part, that's because it's being fed by politicians who are going on and stoking America's fears. And what does that mean?
What are you seeing? But what are you seeing? Is it translating from off the web to individuals being targeted? What are you seeing?
So here, mosque in Connecticut, bullets put through it. Threats made against mosques in Florida where a man said he was going to go and shoot people in the head. Feces smeared on a mosque in Texas. Here locally, a mosque is trying to expand its facility. That hearing for that became so aggressive that a sheriff's deputy shut it down. And
this
we're
is
also
all
seeing individuals.
and this is all
right,
in a very short period of time
since
from the Paris attacks.
The thing that, of all the incidents that I've heard in the last few days of individuals being targeted, to me the most disturbing was a man in California who went up to a pregnant Muslim woman, shoved her so that the stroller that she was pushing hit her in the belly. So we have men attacking a pregnant woman, which is just despicable. And that is the America that we should be projecting right now as the one of our ideals. Our ideals overcome ISIS's corrupt ideology any day of the week. But instead what we're projecting is this fear. ISIS has made us afraid, and our politicians are playing into that. And unfortunately, that gives ISIS the upper hand. We need to stop.
Explain to the American people how that actually plays into ISIS, because I think oftentimes we have this conversation that when you go on crackdown, that all of a sudden that ISIS is winning. It sounds counterintuitive to many people. Explain why that is.
So ISIS is very clear that their strategy is to try to put this divide between Muslims and the West. That they want Muslims in the West to feel like we have no choice. We have to choose between ISIS or we have to choose between the West. We're not buying. We're not interested. Thank you very much. I'm an American. End of story. But our politicians are now playing that same narrative. We have to be afraid of the Muslims.
Well, and it doesn't help, and I think it doesn't help that they're quoting Samuel Huntington, Clash of Civilizations, right? I mean, that's basically the crux of his argument.
So, pause, think about it logically. Clash of Civilizations. Most of the people ISIS is murdering are Muslims. This should be a chance for an alliance between the two. Who is more of a threat? Do you really think ISIS is the biggest threat in the world, or do you think Vladimir Putin and Russia is more of a threat to the United States? Do we have to deal with both threats? Yes, absolutely. But this hysterical notion that we have to close down America for business because this small group in Syria attacked our friends in a heinous manner in Paris just is illogical. This is the time that we as Americans should stand up and say, no, we're not going to turn on each other. And we have to remember, for all my issues I have with George Bush, the man stood up and reminded America what it's about. And that's what we need our political
And he
leaders
understands
to
the
do.
complexities of the world that we live in, right? I mean, it's exactly feeding into ISIS's hands if all of a sudden we label a billion people population that everyone is unfortunately playing into evil's hand. And that is not the case. Talk to me a little bit, though, about the Syrian refugees. And again, we see it's very much a political rhetoric that is really trying to prevent these individuals from coming here. But we already have some here within our ranks. Talk a little bit about how how they're fitting into their local communities and how Americans are responding.
So we have to remember that if you're a refugee, the process of getting into the United States is 18 to 24 months. We have a number of security safeguards in place. Is that always worth examining some more? Sure, why not? Nothing is ever perfect. But what we see among the refugees who have made it here is this tremendous gratitude. These people are fleeing a place where ISIS is trying to kill them, Assad is trying to kill them, they have no way to make a decent living. And they come here to the United States and they're grateful for that. And wouldn't that be the great thing to put on TV? The gratitude that these people have for the ability to come here. And one point that has to be made is among these refugees from Syria and Iraq are people who helped us. So people who interpreted for our troops, people who have helped out our troops in different ways. And now, as a nation right now, what we're saying to them is, that doesn't matter, we're closing the doors to all of you.